And one of the things that I really thought about was like, well, I don't want to regret anything. There's nothing about this sickness that I can regret. It wasn't, to this day, we don't really know what caused it. But the thing that I could regret was not going for it. Um, if I didn't go for it, there always would have been that wonder, what would have happened. But there's no regret in going for something and falling short.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by the leaders in male grooming at Manscaped. They're helping us spice up the hair care regimen on our heads with something fresh. No, it's not a new razor. It's not ball deodorant. Get ready for the game-changing new Scalp Buffer by Manscaped. Let's break down why you need to add this bad boy to your hair care routine. First things first. Check out these thick silicone bristles. They're 100% antibacterial. No more germs hitching a ride on your head. The bristles gently exfoliate your scalp, and the product helps reduce flaking caused by dry skin and buildup. The bristles enhance shampoo penetration for more foam and less product juice. It's not just about feeling good. A better lather means better cleaning power. You can also pair it with the 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner from Manscaped for the ultimate hair care routine. These products are designed to work together, giving your hair the nourishment and strength it needs. Simply put, the Scalp Buffer is your scalp's secret weapon. Its antibacterial silicone bristles keep your scalp healthy, maximizes shampoo performance, gives you a soothing massage, kicks bacteria to the curb, and stores away like a champ. Take your scalp from zero to hero with the Scalp Buffer. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code MILE40 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code MILE40 at manscaped.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. I'm your host, Bishoy Tadros. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from. Check out the show notes. Pick up a copy of Audacious, Break Barriers. There's a discount code in the notes. Really appreciate all the positive feedback now that we've made it past the 100 episode threshold. Super exciting for the show, and I cannot be more grateful for all of you. I'm very excited for today's guest. Today we have a special guest, Jake Heslington. He is the youngest of 7 with 6 older sisters, something we're definitely going to be diving into. He's an elite runner. His college career was cut short by the pandemic in 2020, and after some time not really knowing where he was going to go with running, he set his eyes on the 2024 marathon trials. In 2021, he gave birth to a second daughter, which added a little bit of craziness to his life, but he ended up getting in at the 2023 Grandma's Marathon. He was 21st at the trials about a month before his third was born. And since then, he's been trying to just have fun racing. But there's a lot more to it, and I'm excited to dive in. Jake, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk.
I love how you and I connected. It was your sister that reached out to me?
Yeah, the 5th of the sisters.
And wait, you're the youngest of
Yeah,
all
I'm
of
the
them.
youngest. Yeah.
Jeez. Were your parents just wanted a boy that bad?
I guess so.
Yeah. So what's the age difference between you and the oldest?
So my oldest 2 sisters are twins, actually. They are almost 17 years older than me.
Okay. Got it. Very cool. Let's dive a little bit into home life. When you were younger, getting to know you a little bit more. Obviously, that kind of background is super unique. I have a friend who's one of 5. He's the oldest, and he has 2 sets of twin sisters. uh, but you still got him beat with 7. So, I do know that households like that definitely operate differently than your average household. So, want to kind of get a sneak peek into what it was like growing up, um, what that did to really impact you. I mean, having all that female influence on you, I'm sure played a role in many different ways. And I see the little smirk that you're given as a result of that. So we're gonna learn a little bit about that, but also how you eventually leveled up from a running perspective. Obviously, there's a lot that we're going to dive into there. So let's start with the home front. Tell me a little bit about what life was like growing up.
Well, yeah, a lot of kids. Although when, like I said, there's almost 17-year age or a
Age
17-year
gap.
gap between me and my oldest sisters, and they're twins. So by the time I was 3, probably 2 or 3, they were out of the house. So I can't really ever remember them living there. One of my earliest memories was one of my sister's weddings. I was 4 when she got married. So her husband is pretty much my brother. I've known him my whole life pretty much. And so our family's kind of divided into the older 4 and the younger 3. There's a 6-year age gap in between. So by the time I was like 6, probably 4 of them were moved out, and they got married and had their own family. And then it was the younger 3 at home. So I kind of had a mix of being raised with like the really big family, with 7 kids plus brothers-in-law. I had my first nephew when I was 6. And then we had the little bit smaller family when I was in my teenage years with the 3 kids that were still at home. And
What's
then
it what's
I
it
got
like
also,
being Yeah, sorry, not even mean to cut you off there. Go ahead.
and then being the youngest, I also got to live the only child life for a couple of years as well after my next
Yeah.
oldest sister left for college.
Yeah, so I mean, you got to play a lot of different roles there. What's it like being the youngest amongst that many? I mean, you have to have so many people looking out for you at one point.
Yeah. I've been told, obviously I can't remember when I was like 2, but I was told that I couldn't even talk until I was 2 because I would just grunt and point at something and they would get me whatever I want. I had a lot of moms, some say, like 7 moms that were always wanting to please me as the little brother and everything. Um, so yeah, I had a lot of women in my life, which I think has really helped me. They always gave me a hard time because, being the only boy, I kind of tried to not fall into I tried to embrace my masculinity and gave him a hard time. I was a stereotypical younger brother, giving him a hard time, teasing him. And so they always teased me that I wasn't going to be able to be a good husband. That was teasing. I don't think they really believed that, but
I
I
mean,
think in the end,
6-on-1 is tough, man.
yeah.
That's
And they're awesome. If they listen to this, they should know that I think they're awesome. But yeah, seeing them like raise young families and everything, I got to see that from when I was a really young kid. See them have kids, raise kids. And so sometimes I felt like the older brother of some of my nieces and nephews when they lived closer and everything. So that really did help when I got married and started having kids. I had a lot of examples from the time I was 5 on up, seeing how different parents raise their kids differently. And then like things to look for when I was looking for a wife as well. So it did have a big impact in my life.
What was your relationship like with your parents? I'm sure they had their hands full.
Yeah, they did. I was, it's been interesting now having kids that are like going to school and everything to think back of like, oh, what was this like when I was a kid? It's not something that I'd really thought of beforehand. But I think about my parents, especially my mom. I did a ton of sports growing up. When I was 5, I think I started soccer and baseball. I think I started basketball when I was like 8. And I remember my mom like picking me up from soccer practice to drive to a baseball game and then go home and have dinner after that. And I still hadn't been home from school yet and all that. And I totally took it for granted when I was, 10, 12. And looking back now, I'm like, how in the world was she doing that? Because she also had two other kids at home still and had grandkids and everything. And so my mom was a rock star through all of that. And I don't know if I've ever fully expressed how appreciative I am for that and all the sacrifices that I'm sure she's made.
Yeah. What has that level of female influence, um, you already mentioned it, right? With regards to how you went about looking for your wife, how you went about, envisioning what it was like to be a parent. Um, I want to say those are like influences that kind of really impact you on later in life, right? Like once you get to that stage in life where you want to make those decisions, I'm sure it's really helpful to have had all that example in front of you. But if you go back to childhood, high school years, middle school years, even early college years before you settle down, is there anything that you could speak to with regards to how that female influence played a role maybe in other relationships or other aspects of your life?
I don't know, nothing really. I think the example is big that they gave. And then, like I was saying, with raising kids now, that that impact.
Well, let me ask you a question. Your
Yeah,
six sisters and your mother. I have to imagine there's six of them. I'm sure they're unique. Maybe you have twins. You did mention there are twins, but
yeah.
are the six of them similar, or are they all different in different ways?
I think similar in like the things that like a lot of our traditions are similar. Obviously, we have like the inside jokes and everything from growing up together, but super different. Like parenting styles are way different. Um, and
Was there a rebel amongst you?
I think maybe a couple.
Yeah. All right. Were you one of them?
No, I was the exact opposite. I was a rule follower. I
Wow,
loved
that's kind
rules.
of unusual for the youngest too.
I don't know.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, I loved rules. I love being like in class. I was probably the one when the teacher was like, everyone needs to be quiet. I was super quiet, looking around at everyone, being like, hey, everyone, like, be quiet. Like she's asking us for our attention. So I don't know where that came from. Um, but yeah, that's kind of how I always was.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. No, it's good to have that background. I'm always super interested with dynamics like that because it's just not what you see every day. And a big part of this podcast is uncovering how you were shaped growing up, ultimately, and how it impacted how you went about the trajectory of your life going forward. When you think about other elements of your childhood and your family dynamic, was there ever any sort of um, journey of adversity as a family? Is there anything that you guys had to navigate together, outside of course, just the regular day-to-day chaos of that many people in a household? But was there any element of your childhood that you recall where your family had to kind of come together, and overcome something?
Um, Let me think. Nothing comes to mind immediately. I remember not really growing up. Some of our hardest things as a family um, happened later in life. Like when I was in college, one of my sisters lost their son. Um, he was one at the time, and drowned in a river. And then a couple years later, another one of my sister's husbands died of a heart attack. And that was during the pandemic. So while everyone is worried about the pandemic and social distancing, we have this death in the family. Um, that and there was just a ton of craziness. And that was during the holiday season as well. Um, and that was probably one of the biggest times where I saw my family like all come together, which was really cool because all of us were living in separate places at this point, but we still came together in multiple places. My sister that lost the son was up in Idaho, and all of us went there to work through that. And then when my brother-in-law died, we all came to more central location in like Provo, Orem area of Utah, where I live. Um, but that was a big thing to work through and involved a lot of people because it was now not just 7 kids, but 7 kids with their own
The
families and
families.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean that's definitely um, the power of family rallying for each other during those moments. I do think that that's in a way just special because to your point, with so many of you, it is so many of you building your own families. It's difficult sometimes to come back together to support each other, for each other's, um, you know, these kind of trials and tribulations.
Yeah. And
Um,
that's where, going back to the 6 sisters, it was really big. I could imagine if it was 6 of me in that situation, there wouldn't have been the same support and everything as it was with 6 sisters. I feel like they are just so strong in the support that they can offer each other. I through that whole thing, I kind of felt like I was standing back, being like, I don't know what to do, but all my sisters are able to just be so united, and they know what to do to help each other and everything like that. And so that's something that's been really cool to see with a lot of sisters is how they do with that stuff. I feel like that's something that women are typically a little bit stronger at than men. And that was a really good learning experience for me.
yeah, no, it's awesome to see the power of that bond, and I think that really paints a great picture for us, right? Like, um, definitely, a unique upbringing, but to see it kind of manifest itself during moments like that, where you all come together, is super, super special. I know in your bio, and you kind of alluded to it earlier now, taking a little bit of a shift. Your sisters were not really as athletic as you were, or at least that's how you put it in your bio. That they weren't really into sports, and you kind of took that nod at a young age. Was that part of you kind of? I mean, you were young, so I don't necessarily know that it was anything super intentional. But talk to me a little bit about when the love began.
So my first word was ball.
Hmm.
So that's a little bit of
A
of
little bit of
context. So
insight.
I think my first Christmas present, well, besides when I was like 2 months old, my first Christmas present was a little basketball hoop. I think like the Little Tykes is maybe the brand. I use a ton of places. So by the time I was 1, I was learning how to shoot hoops and throw balls and stuff. I would throw potatoes down the stairs and call them balls. I guess I would throw things at people at church all the time, or maybe not all the time. Maybe that was one instance, but I just loved throwing things. So where that came from, I don't know, because it was earlier than I can even remember. So I just, as early as I can remember, I remember loved throwing things, catching things, kicking things. Um, and then a little bit later came the running, like as once again, as early as I can remember. My family has a farm where we grew alfalfa and everything. And I would just be like, Mom, time me, see how fast I can run around this field. Um, and then I'd run around and then I'd run around again and try to beat my time.
How big was the field?
This one in particular, it was probably about a quarter mile
Okay,
around,
it's
maybe
like
a
a
little
track.
small. Yeah, it was kind of like a track. And I would just, I don't know. I don't feel like that's normal for a kid to be like, I want to run around this field as fast as I can. Time me again, time me again.
No, that's awesome. Before we kind of segue into running, I do want to ask: was there a particular sport that you're good at, and did you start to recognize that perhaps you had, an athletic ability that was superior to others? And like, at what point did you maybe even realize that you were fast, right? Because a lot of kids are, at the end of the day, out there competing, but you obviously at one point began to separate from the pack. So let's start with the first question. When did you perhaps realize that you were good at sports?
Pretty early on, most of the teams that I was on, I was usually the best player or one of them, whether that was soccer, baseball, basketball. Baseball, actually, I was really up and down, pretty inconsistent. But it ended up probably being my strongest sport in the end. But yeah, from like t-ball to like super young soccer, I don't know. I feel like I always just got it. Like you watch little kids play soccer and it's just the bunch ball. Everyone's bunched up chasing the ball. And I feel like I just got it. I would be the one that spreads out. And if I had one teammate that figured out I can pass it to Jake, I was wide open and I would go score all the time. Um, so yeah, I feel like pretty early on, I got it. The school competitions, I was usually the fastest one at like field day or something. So pretty early on, there was an indication that I
So there's
was,
an indication early on.
yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about school out in Utah, just because not too much of the listener base is out there. This is a heavy East Coast listener base over here. And when I ask you about schools out there, I'm mainly asking, were they big? Was there a lot of students there? Was it more rural where you grew up?
I mean, Utah isn't super populated, but I live in the more populated stretch. So school, I don't know what's normal outside
Yep.
of Utah.
Yep.
Um,
What was your
uh,
graduating class?
my graduating class was about 400, I
Okay.
think.
So it's still
It
a
was
pretty
this,
good size. Yeah.
yeah, it's the second, at that point, it was the second largest division that Utah has. It was 4A. We go up to 5A. So I would assume it's pretty normal for a high school.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. And before running came about, what was the sport of choice?
Um, I was still playing all three of those that I mentioned when I started running. And then despite baseball probably being my favorite, it conflicted the most with running. So that was the first one that I dropped. And then I dropped soccer after I played my freshman year in high school and then dropped that. And then I played basketball my sophomore year of high school. And then after that season, that's when I was like, I think the track season after I played basketball, I won my first state championship and was like, okay, it's time to really get into this.
Got it. And when it comes to that transition from team sports to running, like I remember being, and you and I have completely different stories, but I just remember being young and I was all in on team sports. I really wanted to be part of a locker room. I love the camaraderie of it. I love to play basketball. I couldn't even fathom the idea of being alone on a track or being alone on, a run, let's call it even a mile long at that point in my life. And so uh, forget the physical element of it. Mentally, I couldn't reconcile the idea of trading away, the elements of team sports for an individual sport like running. And again, I think your circumstances were a lot different because you were good. So like you were just good at an early age. But did that conflict ever cross your mind once you started to commit to running?
Um, Not really. I really liked running, and I like that you bring up the whole childhood stuff because this kind of goes back to I think some of the childhood stuff. Being the youngest of seven, when I was really young, my family was still really busy and stuff. I had to do a lot of stuff just by myself. I also didn't grow up in an area with a ton of kids my age, just our immediate neighborhood. So I entertained myself all the time. Um, I was like the classic kid that would play checkers against myself, and I always won. Just I play games against myself all the time, um, and so I think that kind of plays a big factor into me really embracing an individual sport because that's what I was used to challenging myself. Um, and despite being in a big family, we didn't really have similar interests. So the whole team aspect was, I guess, the team aspect was unique to sports. But then, yeah, my whole life I had just been entertaining myself and just doing stuff, yeah, to entertain myself. And so pushing myself individually in track and field and cross country came really naturally for me.
Did you have any major influences from a coaching perspective? Was there anyone around you who was guiding you when you started to kind of transition into running as being the focus? Where were you getting outside counsel, or was this solely just you know on your own, you deciding?
Yeah, well, I had friends. So the ultimate reason I started running was because one of my friends invited me to go to track practice in seventh grade. And at first I turned him down. I was like, no, it's basketball season. I'm focusing on basketball. And then for whatever reason, I told my mom that he had invited me to basketball or to track practice. And she's like, well, did you say yes? And I was like, no, I'm doing basketball right now. And she's like, well, you should go. She didn't like force me to or anything. She just said yes. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll go try it out. And then from that day on, I never stopped. Um, and then I had a lot of friends that were doing cross country at the high school and stuff. And so, yeah, just peers, my parents, my natural desire to do that just all kind of pushed me to that one thing. And then I had a great high school coach that took me and mentored me and uh, just was the icing on the cake to keep me in the running world.
Was distance running of interest to you early on, or is that something that you eventually moved into?
Yeah, I started off kind of doing everything in junior high school. I did I did pretty much everything. I would do the sprints, I did high jump, I didn't do the throws, surprisingly. Actually, I did do javelin a couple times and was decent at that. I think just baseball background. But yeah, it didn't take that long to realize that my talent was in distance running.
And how would you have described your body type back then?
Not much
And
different than right now.
don't, yeah, I mean, like, you don't be bashful here. If you want to tell me that you were in phenomenal shape back then, that's good. But I'm trying to dig into um, your trajectory as an athlete, right? Like, again, I do think that it's one thing to be really good in junior high. It's another thing to compete in marathon trials. And I'm trying to pick up on, you may have been in really good shape back then, but I have to imagine along the way there's been some learning, some tweaks, some adjustments that you've had to make to get yourself in optimal shape, for the competition level of competition you're at now.
Yeah. I in junior high, I was the best at my school. Well, no, early on I wasn't. By the end of where I went, ninth grade was still at the junior high, even though it was technically high school. It's kind of weird. So by ninth grade, I was the best at my school. Um, and then my first year in high school, I was just off of varsity. So freshman year cross country, there were 7 seniors that made up the varsity team, and then I was number 8. And so then they all graduate, and I come back my junior year or my sophomore year, sorry, and all 7 of them had graduated. So I went from 8th guy on the team to first guy on the team automatically. Um, and then so yeah, I was one of the best sophomores in the state that year. The next year I won the state cross country championship, and then senior year I won cross country track as well. So I was always
So you
the
knew
state
early
champion.
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
um
at what point do you make the decision about running collegiately? And this is something I'm actually always interested in, right? Like, because when you think about a lot of a lot of Olympians and a lot of runners who get to that level, it becomes pretty apparent early on that they're going to compete at that kind of level. When did it start to cross your mind that you may be number one in the state, but where do you compete on a national level? And when did those ideas start going through your mind?
that wasn't really until my senior year. I think like junior year I started realizing like, oh, maybe I could run in college when I won a state cross country championship. And then just like associating with other people at the state championships, and they were talking about like, oh yeah, so and so is going to run at BYU, and so is going to Utah State, and I was like, oh, like I guess that's something that I could do too. Um, and then, but I wasn't really relevant on the national level until my senior year in cross country. And then I did make it to the national championships, the Nike Cross Nationals, my senior year. And so that was my first like national level competition, was my senior year in high school.
What is that in Oregon, or where is that?
Yeah, it was in Portland.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It
That's
was
awesome.
fun. It was
That's got to be
muddy.
cool. That's got to be cool. You probably got a
Yeah.
lot of cool swag, right?
Yep, they loaded us up.
Yeah, that's got to be nice. Um, and okay, so talk to us about that experience. What was that like? And at that point, were you committed to BYU, or where were you at that point?
I think I committed shortly after that. I remember it being in the winter time
Yep.
that I went on my visit to BYU and then signed shortly after. So it was probably like January, February when
Okay.
I committed to BYU. And then the national championship was in December of the previous year. So, yeah. And then you want me to talk about that experience of the
Yeah.
national championship?
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the right time to ask you this, or maybe I could ask you, as we continue to build up. But I am interested to know. You probably met so many people along this path and along this journey. You probably met some incredible runners, incredible athletes. We already spoken about some of the coaches, but because it's such a tight knit community, I am interested to know about some of the people who've played a role, like just in kind of shaping your mind about the sport. Forget about, earlier we were talking about uh, some of the takeaways and maybe tweaks that you've made to your body, so on and so forth. But even people who've talked to you about the the mental and emotional impact of this sport. And I think that that's something that I definitely want to dive into. So let's talk about nationals right now, and maybe go from there.
Okay. So, I mean, it was a like total dream come true for any high school athlete. Like, first time getting a trip paid for, like they paid for the plane and everything to get there. Someone waiting for us at the airport. Um, and then uh, there were a couple people and a team that went from, actually a couple teams that went from Utah. So like we were all on the plane together. It felt like we just felt important. They take us to our hotel that they have for us. Like it was my first experience having anything like that, where like I'm being treated like someone really important. And then they took us to the Nike campus and gave us a tour. We would have dinners, and like pro athletes would come and sit next to us. Like I remember getting a picture with Galen Rupp. Matt Centrowitz was there. Matt Tagenkamp. Like, just all of them were there hanging out, doing their stuff. And so like they were my heroes at that point. And so getting to associate with them, um, it really was just like a dream come true. And then lining up at a race, looking down the line and being like, okay, everyone here is is really good. And I was used to winning races at that point. Like most of the races that I would win, or was top two or something like that. And then at that race I was 28, so like it was a really unique experience there to to not be up front and winning, running against top level competition, guys that like most of them probably went on to run in college and have pretty successful careers and everything. So yeah, from a high schooler perspective, that was just a dream come true. It was amazing.
What is I want to make sure that I think through this question properly, but I want to give the audience a sense of when you think about being at nationals, right? And you think about being on that track, lining up against the other runners. And to your point, right, you're used to placing first or second in the majority, if not all, of your races to that point. At that point, what is the difference between you and the person who finishes first, at nationals? And And then again, the difference between the most elite person in your crowd and, someone who's winning, like, this last summer in Paris. Just want to get a sense of like, how far are you? Like, if you're at nationals, right? And you're top 5 at nationals, how far are you from being on that Olympic podium?
I think it depends a lot. In high school, there's a ton of variation because like some coaches at some high schools are like a PE teacher that have never run competitively in their lives. Some are, some I know of were professional runners and they're coaching at a high school level. A lot of them ran in college. And so you have some people who are super underdeveloped and maybe they were at nationals, maybe they weren't at nationals. And then they end up just having these huge improvements through college if they're lucky enough to get a college coach. And then there are some people that I know that like I saw them finishing top in the country in high school, and I was like, oh yeah, they're going to be in the Olympics for sure. And then and some of them do end up following that trajectory, and they're Olympians or really close to it. And then some just because of different priorities or whatever, some fall off the face of the earth. Some, uh, you know, maybe they matured faster and they were at their best in high school. They had a really good coach, and so they were still good in college, but they had already met their peak. So I think there's a correlation between talent in high school and college, but there's definitely a lot of variation.
Yeah, yeah. We had Ashton Eaton on the podcast a couple episodes ago, gold medal decathlete. And he talked about, his experience, his upbringing. He talks about, him and I talked about the number one thought he had when he got to the Olympics and just kind of looking around and immediately thinking, of the thousand reasons why, you know, he could have not been there essentially, right? Like, all it takes is one little thing to go wrong, whether it's an injury, a setback, or even, and this isn't necessarily going wrong, but even the differentiator of having a coach who's had a certain kind of experience versus someone who perhaps just wasn't afforded that kind of opportunity for whatever reason. And that, that small piece of underdevelopment may have played a role in um, where they were going to get to ultimately on their trajectory. So that's a really good call out. So talk to me about where we go from there. So now, obviously you're at the top of your game, one of the best runners in the country at that point. You go to BYU. Where does the journey go from here?
Yeah, so there was actually a 2 year gap in there where I didn't run at all, to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I went to Guatemala, came back in terrible shape. I remember my first run back, the middle of the summer, I ran like 4 miles slow, and I was wrecked after that. I
Did
was
you
not
did you I'm guessing you missed the sport?
like miss it emotionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I would have loved to run more when I was in Guatemala, but it doesn't, it's hard to make happen there. That wasn't my focus. So yeah, I came back really, really anxious to get back into shape, but I did not anticipate how hard it would be to get back into shape.
Got it. I think just for context, why don't you educate us a little bit on the mission in Guatemala and what you did over there, just so we kind of have some insight.
Awesome. Yeah. So right after high school, I left. I was assigned to Guatemala. As a missionary, you put in like an application with basic information. I think I put I learned 3 years worth of Spanish in school, and based on that, uh, they assign where you're going to go on your mission. So I didn't know where I was going. I just got a letter in the mail. It's kind of fun to invite all of your friends over, and you open it and everyone finds out at the same time where you're going. While you're there, you have a companion assigned to you that you're with all the time. You work in pairs. And so even for like exercise and stuff, you have to be in the same area. So like I know of people who've like gone to a track and one doesn't want to run. So like one runs around the track while the other one does exercise on the infield or whatever. In Guatemala, I couldn't do that. So I had a couple companions who were willing to go on like a 10-minute run with me. One of them, I remember we ran, like we didn't have washing machines. We pay someone to wash our clothes by hand. And so we just put our laundry bags over our shoulders and ran there. After that, he never agreed to run with me again. Um, so yeah, it's just day in, day out. I did stay in like good health because we didn't have cars. We didn't have bikes. The roads down there aren't really bikeable. And just, yeah, so it was walking miles every day, just talking to people, focusing really on sharing the message of Jesus with everyone. So great time, but really hard to get in really anything else. That's the sole focus at that time. It was, we could email family once a week. And then I called home for Mother's Day and for Christmas, and that's it. So it's like pretty just off by myself doing that for 2 years.
Got it. Okay. All right. So now that context is good for everybody to know. You get back from that. Obviously that, and you're still young, right? Like how old are you when you did that? When you were in Guatemala?
I came back when I was 20.
Came back when you were 20. So you
Yep.
spent like 2 out of your 20, that's 10% of your life in Guatemala at that point.
Yeah, I
That's
guess
that's
so.
pretty significant, when you consider, you've only been an adult for so long at that point. And so I have to imagine that you come back and there's probably a little bit of an adjustment there. You talk about going on that run. Um, Now, where I want to kind of connect the dots is you were accepted to BYU already, right?
Right.
So you knew you were gonna, and did you know you were gonna be running at BYU at that point?
Yeah. Yeah. They
So
just,
how does it work if you come back and you're not in optimal shape?
um, the way they have it worked out is if you committed before, if you like, I signed the letter of intent. I think there's probably a clause in there that said like this will start upon your return, but there's definitely some risk there. Fortunately, like Coach Icestone at BYU, he's done this, hundreds, if not thousands of times over the years now. Probably not thousands, but a lot of athletes coming home from missions. He's used to getting them back in shape, and there are some that come back from a mission and they were underdeveloped in high school and they just take off after a mission. Some come back and they just never get it back. There have been some really talented runners that look so good in high school, they come off a mission and they never really come back.
Super interesting. Awesome. I mean,
So
yeah, so it adds another layer to this, which keeps things interesting. All right, so you go on that 4-mile run, then what happened?
I mean, through the summer, I got back in the summer, end of June. So I had July and August to get into somewhat, I mean, not good shape, but
Yeah,
good enough
better
to
shape.
better shape. Then school starts. We go to cross country camp. And this is kind of a unique time where the Church of Jesus Christ had changed their policy. It used to be that you could go out on a mission when you were 19. They changed the age requirement to 18 right before I left. So we had 2 years. We had 18 and 19-year-olds all going out on a mission at the same time. So when I came back from mine, there was a group of like 15 of us, almost half the team probably had just come back from a mission. And so it was almost like two separate teams. We had the guys that weren't out of shape, and then we had the out of shape portion of the team. And so that created a really unique dynamic on the team where it kind of was like two teams. Probably not ideal, but that's kind of what happened. Um, and then, but then, I mean, after like 6 months, probably is when a lot of us were feeling like late December, looking like, okay, we're maybe back into a similar fitness as we were at the end of high school. So generally the plan that Coach Ison has, like everyone's going to redshirt that first cross country season, probably redshirt indoor track and maybe be ready for outdoor track. But then in December, I got blood clots, which I mean that's a whole story of
Well,
itself. If you,
that's where we're gonna go. I want to go there because
yeah,
I think that'll really, help the audience understand um, some of the personal adversity you faced on your running journey.
yeah, and this was the first big one. Like I had minor injuries in high school, but really hadn't had many setbacks. And then suddenly it was Christmas Eve. I'm finally looking like, I'm in decent fitness. I was doing a workout with guys who actually had been on the team for a couple of years, um, and during that workout, we were doing mile repeats, either 3 or 4 by mile on an indoor track, and my chest just started kind of burning, and it was harder for me to breathe. And I was like, "Oh, this is weird. Like maybe I'm just getting sick or whatever." But I muscled through the second one, I think, and then after the third one, I was just like, "Guys, I don't know what's up. I can't do this anymore." They were surprised. I wasn't one to really do that. Um, and so I just sat out for the next little bit. And then we had driven up to Salt Lake to do this on a big indoor track. And on our drive home, like, yeah, I was just burning. My shoulder was kind of achy. Um, and I was like, am I like, did I just develop sports induced asthma or something? I know very little about asthma, so that's probably super inaccurate, but that was kind of what I was thinking. Like, did I get asthma or something like that? Um, and then I went home. Like we weren't thinking much of it. And it was Christmas Eve. We did Christmas, and I wasn't feeling well still. Um, like I went for a run. I think I went sledding and everything like that. But that kind of hurt me. And we're like, oh, maybe I like cracked a rib or something doing something, and that is making me feel like it's hard to breathe. Anyway, over like a month, I was diagnosed with bronchitis, pneumonia, just a bacterial infection, all sorts of things. And then it wasn't until um, my leg, like my calf, just swelled up like crazy. And it was super hard, super tight. I was in a lot of pain. We had one of our neighbors come over who was a physical therapist, and he's like, "Yeah, this doesn't seem like any just normal tightness. It honestly seems like your blood is pooling up in your leg." And so he's like, "I would get to the emergency room." So we drove to the emergency room. They looked at it under ultrasound or something like that, and immediately were like, "Yeah, you have almost no blood flow in your leg." Um, yeah, my mom had the scare of being in the elevator with someone right after she found out that I had a blood clot in my leg. And she's like, "Oh, what are you here for?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I'm here for my wife. She just had to have her leg amputated for a blood clot in her leg." And so my mom had that instant scare of just like, "Oh my, like that's what my son is here for." This was an emotional roller coaster for her. Probably not much of a roller coaster, is just straight down until it was until it was up. Um, but yeah, and then I don't know how all the medical stuff works. But I had blood clots in my leg, like up by my hip, and then that I don't know if that was the cause or something. But anyway, somehow it goes up. It also affected my chest cavity and my lungs. The blood was pooled up in my chest cavity, and that had also caused there was enough pressure there to cause my lungs to collapse. So I think they said one was like 60% collapse and one was like 50%. I don't know. Like I don't know how all that works, but it was pretty significant. They had to take out like it was almost 2.5 liters of fluid from my chest cavity, just with a big, like 8-inch long needle. They stuck that through my back and just sucked it out. And that was a very weird, unpleasant experience. So anyway, I went from being in pretty good shape again to suddenly, well, over the course of a month, I lost 20 pounds. Um, I had gotten down to like a normal running weight, and then I lost another 20 pounds because I just really couldn't eat during this whole time. And suddenly I'm in the ICU for a week.
Was this your
Um,
biggest? I'm guessing this was your biggest medical scare of your lifetime.
yeah, still up to this point for sure.
And from your family's perspective, was this the first, outside of obviously the tragedy that hit your family between your brother-in-law and your nephew, was this, the essentially the hardest thing they had to go through from a medical perspective?
Um, and this was before
Oh, that was
those
before that.
deaths.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even to that point, maybe then was this kind of like, because
Yeah, it may have.
this catches people off guard. Like this is not, it's not like a slowly hitting type of diagnosis, especially for someone like you who's in optimal shape, right? Like, so it probably
Yeah.
caught a lot of people out of left field.
Yeah. I mean, most people probably in my family were aware that like I was sick and stuff
Yeah,
was not right. But
yeah,
then suddenly, like, that we went to the ER at night. And so suddenly it was like, oh, we're actually in the ICU with Jake. He has
yeah.
blood clots. And like, I was at risk of dying at any moment. If the blood clot dislodges or something like that, it could have killed me at any point.
Did they tell you how close you were potentially to an amputation?
No,
No.
the only thing I heard
So
about an
probably,
amputation.
probably better we don't know.
Yeah. um, but yeah, I think from what I've heard, it could have. I don't know what would have had to happen to my leg to cause an amputation. Luckily, we caught it early enough.
What was your mindset after you got the all clear? Was it like, hey, like I'm gonna come back stronger than ever, or is it like maybe I should chill out?
It was really complicated in my mind because there were multiple doctors that were working with me, and some of them were pessimistic and were like, "No, you're never really gonna like. You'll be able to run again, but you're never going to be a competitive runner again." And then some were like, "Oh yeah, we'll have you back running in no time." Um, but then I still didn't know, like, well, are you aware that like I don't just want to run. I want to run really fast. And so, but so for a time, I was like, okay, if I never run, what's going to happen? This has been everything for me for years. It's been my social life. It's been my exercise, my recreation. It's been everything. So what's life going to be like if I can't do this? And so it was a good time to really like meditate and contemplate what's my life going to look like if I can't bounce back from this. And really realize like I had a ton of family coming in and visiting me and just realize, like this life isn't about running. I'm here for a much bigger purpose. And my family is really what matters. And so overall, looking back, I'm grateful for it because I came out of it a much better person with a much better big picture perspective on things, where before I was probably a little bit more selfish, focused on myself. So I had that really valuable learning experience. But then also there was the optimism from other doctors. And I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to come back, but the only way I'm going to see if I can come back is if I just work like crazy. And so I had there were two possible outcomes. Either I can run really fast again or I can't. And so I just started working. There's nothing else I could really do. It was just doing the best I could.
The good thing is you had the foundation of just an incredible work ethic. And so that had to have helped as well with regards to helping making the decision for you, right? Like at the very least, you knew that if you were going to give it a go, you were going to give it your best shot. And, you know, you probably were going to be happy knowing that you gave it your best effort because you've seen the result of your effort in the past.
And one of the things that I really thought about was like, well, I don't want to regret anything. There's nothing about this sickness that I can regret. It wasn't, to this day, we don't really know what caused it. But the thing that I could regret was not going for it. If I didn't go for it, there always would have been that wonder, what would have happened. But there's no regret in going for something and falling short.
Got it. Of course, of course. No, that makes sense. So from there, you get back out there. Obviously, we know where this story is going. So talk to us about the comeback.
Oh, it was long. I was going from like really from zero. I like while I was in the hospital still, I would go for when I first like was able to get up and walk, and they said like, go do what you can. I was on oxygen, and I think it was a later day, but at one point it was like my 90-year-old grandpa pulling my oxygen for me. Um, and so that was a funny image. But the first day I got up, I got out of bed, I walked like maybe 10 feet to the door, and then walked down the hallway of the hospital like 15 feet, found a chair, sat down, caught my breath for a couple minutes. Like I was wiped out after walking those like 25 feet. I walked back to my room, went to sleep. Um, so that didn't last long. The next day I was able to go farther and everything. And, but after, like a month or something, and I went back to school, I had missed the first month or so probably of school, really not being able to do much. I got down to the minimum course load that I could. But my first day back on campus, I was going to live on campus, moved home. Fortunately, my parents lived close enough that I could do that. I walked to my class. And then my mom came and picked me up as close as she could get to that building. And I walked back and I went home and I just slept the rest of the day. So it was really slow. Like I couldn't really run even. And not because like my body wouldn't let me, just because I was so weak and winded from everything. And so took a really long time. Once I was, it took a really long time, but it was consistent. I did progress almost the whole time, which was really helpful. I could see those little wins every day. Like, oh yeah, yesterday I could only walk to class, but now 2 days later, I was able to walk to 3 classes, just things like that. And then I was able to, go on 5-minute runs and 10-minute runs and just slowly build up. But I had a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, you just have to be patient. And I got so sick of hearing that I just needed to be patient. It was true, but I hated hearing that. Just be patient, because I wanted so much more, and it just didn't feel like it was coming. I couldn't feel like I could breathe normal for like a year and a half probably. And then finally when things did start clicking, like a year and a half later, I was able to run for BYU in BYU uniform, ran the steeplechase, made it to the national championships actually, which was great. And that was like that was just such a wonderful feeling after all of that super slow progression, that I was like, wow, like I was able to get to, like, this was the end goal. Maybe by the end of my college career, I'd be able to be at that point. So I was really grateful and lucky to be able to be there in under 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the idea of, and this is a topic and theme that comes up on this podcast all the time, right? You talk about how you were able to walk to 2 classes and then you were able to walk to 3 classes, how you're able to go on a 5-minute run and then a 10-minute run. And, that really brings home the theme of just celebrating small wins, which I feel like as a runner and as an endurance athlete, that is the name of the game. And what I try to project through this podcast is there are so many parallels between that in the world of sport and when it comes to life in general, right? Like, because it's that mentality of just stacking the small wins and ultimately getting to where you got 2 years later. Not saying that everyone's going to get to that point, but I am saying that if everybody, takes that approach of taking a step back, and seeing how the blocks can come together, ultimately, that's how they get further along with regards to whatever goal they're chasing down. And so I love that you positioned it that way. But also, I will call out the way that you positioned it was it was a little matter of fact. Like, you knew you were going to get back to where you belonged once you started to build that momentum and that confidence. And I think that speaks to who you are as an athlete, as someone that's hit certain peaks throughout his lifetime, to know that he can continue to carry on and get to new levels. So that's really awesome. Now I want to get to, at what point now are we thinking about Olympic trials? And when is it becoming real that you're like this close, potentially?
So yeah, so that was early on in college that happened. And then towards the end of college, I graduated in 2020. So that would have been my senior. What?
I said fun time to graduate.
It was a blast. Yeah, everyone loved it.
Yeah.
So my senior year, I kind of a breakout season where before I'd really only been good in the steeplechase. But my senior year, like I was an All-American in cross country. We won the team national championship, and I'm just riding this running high. I qualified for the indoor national championships in the 5K, and then we were in Albuquerque for the national championships, and the madness just broke loose while we were there. Like in the 2 days that we were there, everything broke loose, and so they canceled the meet the day before. BYU brought us home. They booked us new flights, got us home that night. And then I can't remember exactly the timing, but then shortly after they canceled the outdoor season as well. And um, so I just felt like there was so much more left in me that I didn't get the chance to do. And the NCAA gave the option to come back for another year. And just because of family reasons and everything, and my situation with school and everything, I decided not to do that, just for the sake of being in school and running in the NCAA. But then the job that I had lined up also fell through due to the pandemic. So I was in this big limbo period of unemployment, not knowing where running is going. And we already had one kid at this point. So like I was trying to be the provider for my family. So that was a super hard time. But then once I got a job and everything like that, and was able to like focus my life again, that was just from like, I kept running through that whole time, and just, people talking about the Olympic trials. That's what like Connor Mance and Clayton Young were going to go for. And I was like, sure. Like that sounds like a great way to kind of cap off my running career, since I wasn't able to have my senior season. Like, why not go for Olympic trials? So that's what kind of pushed me to start focusing on the marathon, was still wanting to do something, because I knew that I left a lot out there. And so, yeah, that's what became my new goal.
What was your best time?
In what?
Marathon.
Up to that point, I hadn't run one.
Oh, God. Wow. Okay. Wow. So what did you run then?
So I thought that I was going to just focus on the half marathon, because they let you qualify with the half marathon with the marathon. I went into it really naive, though. I went to grandma's half marathon, so Gary Bjorklund half marathon. I didn't even know that it didn't even count until the next year. So after that, I refocused on the Indianapolis marathon. And so I went there later that year, and I ran a 2:18:50 something. So I missed it by less than a minute. And then went for it again right after Indy. Actually, I got injured with IT band syndrome for like 6 months, and then had a really quick build up to the grandma's marathon, and just barely got it there.
What'd you
qualify
record?
for the trials.
What was the time?
2:17:40.
Wow. What was the cutoff?
2:18.
Wow. That last mile must have been a sprint.
Yeah, well, yeah, not as I was trying to do a lot of math.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like, okay, here's the time that I have. I think I could run this time for the last mile and still be okay. And then if I have something left for that last 0.2, I can do it. And so it was close enough that I definitely didn't know until I could see the clock, the last like 200 meters. And once I could see the clock, I was like, okay, I can make it there in a minute or whatever it was. But until that point, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get this.
What I love about your story is that I guess let me rephrase it, because I was going to say up until a certain point in your life, things were normal. And I want to go back to your family dynamics, because again, those are not normal family dynamics, being the youngest of seven. So, they were normal for you perhaps, right? Like you were living your life, you were an athlete, you were a standout athlete, you were excelling, and clearly you were going places with it. And when it comes to your major setback, it didn't really hit you until you were again, in the early stages of your adult life, and it was definitely an impactful experience, and one that I'm sure you'll continue to live with, and I'm sure that's going to provide you some profound, just as a father now, like, I'm sure, like, in the back of your mind now, like, things could happen at any time unexpectedly, right? Like, you've
Yeah.
experienced it yourself, and you've come out of it, fortunately, and things have worked out very well for you on the back of it. Uh, but one of the themes that you brought up on today's episode was just how much perspective it put for you, right? Like, it kind of allowed you to recognize what was important to you, and despite running being such a critical piece of your life, that experience also kind of allowed you to reflect and take time to look at the bigger picture, which I can, speak to personally as a runner and someone who puts a lot of time into the sport. It's a difficult juggle, right? Like, because a lot of the sport is is a little selfish, right? Like, you just want to continue to improve, and you want to continue to stick to your programming and to build your programming, and to see where you can go. And it's a lot of times it's like tunnel vision, especially because it's such an individual sport. And so it's really cool to kind of hear you on the back of it now, to see where you've come. And what I love about, the last couple minutes of this episode is the fact that even if even if like from a running perspective, you've probably hit the highest level you can get to, your story's far from over, because you're clearly using this journey to impact others, and that's what's awesome about it. And I want to say thank you for that. um, Overall, Jake, you've really, your story has impacted me for multiple reasons. I want to thank you for taking the time to share it with all of us, and I want to make sure that if there's anything that you leave the audience with, after hearing what you went through, I give you the floor really quick to round us out.
Oh man, it's a lot of pressure now.
No pressure. You can
Yeah.
keep it as long or
Yeah.
as short as possible. I always ask people, right, if there was an overall theme from your experience, or a mantra that really resonated with you, or just a mindset or a piece of advice you got from someone who is with you, either on the comeback side of this journey, or while things got rough. Thank you for coming on, for taking the time out, for really letting us in. It's all about using our personal experiences to open up about how those personal setbacks really inspired us to dig deep within, to get to where we need to go, and to build the current version of ourselves. And so thanks again, man. I really appreciate it, and be on the lookout for this release.